Welcome to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries, and I am very excited about my guest today. She is the grande dame of psychic detective work. Her book, A Mind for Murder, in my opinion, is more compelling than the TV shows Medium, Ghost Whisperer, CSI, Cold Case, and Homicide all put together. With more than 400 criminal cases under her belt, she is the only psychic to lecture at the FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. She's quite a character and has lots to share with us today. Welcome, Noreen Renier.
Well, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, tell our listeners how you went from being Director of Advertising and Public Relations for a hotel chain to the most well-known psychic detective in the country.
Well, I can tell you did read the book, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do. I used to be a skeptic. And I think there's a difference between being skeptical and being closed-minded. And I did have an open mind, but I didn't really believe in psychic phenomena. And I was working as PR and advertising director for the Hyatt Hotel in Orlando, Florida. And someone asked me to rent one of our lecture rooms to a psychic. And I knew what they looked like. They all had long chins, big noses, and either a wart or obvious pimple on their face, and they dressed funny, so I didn't really want them at the hotel, so I kept avoiding them, and then finally I couldn't do it anymore, and I met her, the psychic, and I couldn't find one pimple or wart on her. She was a little petite thing in a suit.
In a suit.
And I remember it was, I think, a light blue, powder blue suit. And she knew I was skeptical, so she did something on me, which I didn't believe at that time, but she told me about some scars on my body, which no one really knew, but I still wasn't convinced. And then she told me about a new chair I had just gotten in my office, and no one knew about that. So I left, she told me more, but I left confused. How could someone do those things?
Right.
So I did rent her the hall, and then she gave me a book to read. It was talking about psychics working with the police, psychics traveling with their mind into the past or into the future, and I think a good science book at that time would have been more credible to my mind than what I was reading. So I discarded it and forgot all about it until a few weeks later, one of her friends asked me to meditate. Now, long ago, 30-some years ago, meditation wasn't very popular. People thought it was an occult, that it was going to damage your brain or some sort. But she said it relaxed you, and I liked that word. So I thought, well, what the heck? Let me give it a try. So I grabbed my best girlfriend, who was an ex-nun, and she believed in nothing at that time, and we both started meditating. And I think the first meditation was uneventful, but I think it was the second or third meditation that we did, and it was at my house. And it was a round table, and the sun was coming in, and it was in the morning, and we started the breathing. It wasn't, I don't remember exactly, but I know we were doing a lot of deep breathing and things like that, and all of a sudden, it felt like somebody had plugged me into a socket.
Wow.
I didn't know it was energy at that time until it started hurting me, and I cried out, and as I cried out, it was like a voice spoke out of my mouth, but I could hear it. Now, and my mind was going, what the hell is going on? Is there insanity in my face? And I kept thinking, and this voice is talking and talking. But that when I opened my eyes, Joanne was crying. She was a Winnebago Indian, and I had just given her a message from her deceased grandmother that had died.
Right then and there.
Right. So that was the beginning. And then it really was, does it really work? Does it really work? So I think the one thing anyone that wants to develop it is to practice.
Well, I think that this is really interesting because you did not mention in the book growing up and having these abilities. This happened, when you were in your 20s?
I think closer to my 30s.
And
yeah,
so
I think I was in my 30s.
Yes, you had this amazing awakening through a meditation.
It just blew me away. It was like it landed me on the moon, and it was all so new. But I still had that basic instinct to be skeptical. And so that's why I always wanted to test myself, prove that this was real, and that's why I did a lot of research outside of Duke. It was with the Psychical Research Foundation.
Right, at Duke University. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot because I thought they would have a book that would say Chapter 2, Page 4, this is how you can hold a ring or watch and get information. But, of course, they didn't.
Well,
they just validated that I could do these things.
Well, I think it's important to let our listeners know that you use psychometry, which I've talked about on a number of different programs before, which is holding objects and gaining information. Before we talk about some of your famous cases, could you please give us a little example of how you do work? Can you tell us a little bit about the psychometry?
Okay. On police cases, the police say homicide. They have a body, so they usually send me. I do 99% of my work over the phone.
Oh, my, good.
It's easier going to the scene of the crime, but I can't travel all that. It just would be too expensive for everybody. So let's say they send me a belt and maybe a shoe. It won't mess up their investigation, but it was on the person at the time he was killed. So then
correct.
The next thing I do is describe by touching the belt. I want to make sure I'm connected. Again, here comes the skeptic in me. So I usually describe what the victim looked like when he was alive, and then they go, yes. Very seldom do I get no's, but they go, yes. And then I become killed because at this point, I not only want to prove to myself that I'm tuned into this case, I want the detectives to know I'm real.
So you are actually, with your connection to the energy in the belt, you are becoming the person who is being killed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it used to be in the beginning, I overdid it, and the pain was just excruciating at times, depending on how I was killed. But now I can just do a little bit and try to get out of it and go into a different place. But I do basically the same thing, and then they want to know what he looks like. So as the years progressed, I found I could work with an artist, and if they draw just what I see, it usually looks like the person that is the killer. So we have a picture of the killer, and it's not going to be an exact likeness, but at least they can eliminate the tall blondes or the fat redheads. You know, it'll give them a ammo to go on. And then I just sit there and listen to what they want me to see and respond to whatever questions they have.
Well, this is, for our listeners, for anybody who's listening to this is, Noreen is describing imperfection, the way that she works, and the way that some of us who do this work with investigators apply these talents to a very unique capability called psychometry. And let me ask you, do you work with crime scene photos?
No. I don't want to see the photograph. I want to see it in my head.
Got it.
So I get nothing from them. I don't even get a full name. All I want when they book the reading is to know if it's a missing person or a homicide, because each one is so different. With the missing person, everything is gone with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I did this, I didn't think it would work. I just didn't think it would work. So I must have some other part of my mind that I'm using. And after the first 2 or 3 bodies that they found, I got more and more confident, and I started had miles a few times or feet a few times. Again, trying to figure out where they started from and lead the police to where the body is now. Sometimes I fly above the body and try to give them landmarks so they know which section I'm talking about.
Oh, good. Well, listen, let's take a short break, Noreen,
okay,
and we're going to talk more about you hovering above that body and seeing where it is. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Marla Fries with Noreen Renier, and she is just describing about how she works when in an investigation, and you just mentioned hovering above a body. Now, holding the object and being transported, is that right?
Right. I think I call it, I'm traveling at a distance, a remote distance and seeing, but I can go 100 feet, 20 feet, whatever they want. But again, I'm at this time more in a semi-trance, so they have to ask me the questions.
Well, this is what I loved about your book, and I think that sections of your book should be distributed to every law enforcement agency across the country.
God, I love you. I didn't know I would love a woman. I do.
Well, maybe we can talk about this later. I think that the way that you have developed some of your techniques are crucial. You even brought in a hypnotist to work with.
In the beginning, I would try anything that would help me to be better at what I did, and really it was the police. I think we had started over the phone, and they had a detective that had been studying hypnotism and been working in it, so they asked if it would be all right to hypnotize me. And in those days, I didn't have a speakerphone, so I kept dropping the phone as I was going under a trance, but I gave them enough information that they were impressed, and they flew down. They were in New York. This was the Albany, New York case. And they flew down, and we did a session every day, and then they would go back and listen to it, and the next day we would do more. And it was, it works. The mind, it's amazing what the mind can do.
Well, you mentioned the remote viewing. Now, for our listeners, what Noreen is referring to is what I consider natural remote viewing, which is not the technical remote viewing that the military has been trained
That's right.
in.
They don't like you to use that term unless you're, but I go remotely, and I'm looking at a distance, so it's a different interpretation of it, but it's not the remote,
it's not
the militaries.
No, but it is natural.
It is natural, absolutely.
Yes. And I think that to be able to allow the mind, which is so amazingly facile in so many ways, to be able to have the freedom to do this, I think that's what's so amazing about this work, Noreen. And the fact that you really, you and Dorothy, what was Dorothy's last name?
Allison.
Yes, Dorothy Allison, who passed away a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But, you guys are the ones that have gone out there and gone through the trenches and
open the doors for those that...
Yes, absolutely. I am so grateful for that. But, as we...
But I want to close those doors. What I want to do is train the police. Now, I'm not going to train them all, but if we had a small squad, Amber Alerts would be wonderful because I usually get the missing person cases. 2 years is new for me. It's usually 5, 10. I've done 40-year-old cases. In fact, I'm doing a 40-year-old case, a triple homicide now. Not this moment, but... I'm doing one now. I think I have lectured to them, and I have given them a one-day workshop, and they're wonderful. They know a gun when they see a gun.
Of course, yes, and they're so intuitive themselves. They
are.
They're amazing. And,
so I'm going to keep pounding on doors and screaming until they'll give me a try. Let me see what I can do with them.
Well, to your credit, you do have a number of extremely successful cases. I am just stunned that you had the prediction of President Reagan being shot.
And where I did it at the FBI Academy.
Were you at Quantico when that happened?
Yes. They had brought me in after my first case. The first case, it was a rape case that I had, and it made headlines. And I had no knowledge. I don't know what the heck I told them, but I always had a answer and question period, and I was started off in small classrooms like 35, 40, and then they put me into the big auditorium, which was like 350 people. And we were in the big auditorium when we're doing questions and answers, and someone just innocently said, well, how do you, Reagan had just been elected, how do you see things going for him? And then that's when I said, I feel him being hurt in the upper chest, or I don't know if I actually said shot, won't be killed, told him the month, I don't know, forget exactly everything.
Now, well, hold on. When you were doing that, okay, you were looking at the person who was talking to you. Did you see yourself as Reagan?
No. Again, I'm good at answering questions.
Okay.
So his question is, what do you see for Reagan? What do you see for how his presidency, or how he's going to do in his? And I remember saying he was going to be very popular.
Right.
But I just was getting the information.
So you heard the information.
I'm not clear audio. I don't know how it works. It goes so quickly.
Did you see
my mouth just starts talking. It's sort of like in the first grade we have to look at a picture of an apple maybe to know it's an apple.
Yes.
But later on we can just say apple without looking at the picture.
Right.
So it goes so quickly, and that's why I think some psychics speak so fast.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're getting that information and they want to get it out.
Oh, of course. It's a download. It comes out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
Or the pictures. You also mentioned in the book, and this is also how I see a lot of stuff, is like a movie. It rolls out like a movie.
Yes. Sometimes not as clear as I would like.
Well,
sometimes not as clear.
Is that because, and I love this about you, Noreen, and our listeners will get a kick out of this. You know, you've been known to have maybe a glass of wine or a hit of
I love to mix my spirits, yes.
well,
you know, it was terrifying in the beginning working with cops because I had no knowledge of them. Only thing I had in connection with them was speeding tickets. You know, that was my only connection.
That's great. Well, you got to start somewhere. Well, in reference to law enforcement, going to Quantico and being invited by, I mean, you've got some impressive people standing behind you. I remember contacting Vernon Gebhardt, the author of Practical Homicide, when I started working with law enforcement, and he said Noreen is the best in the business. And this was back in like 1995.
I had just started, you know, well, I think I started in the late 70s, early 80s, but I did one case for him, and he was totally impressed. And he's a hardcore
tough
detective,
guy.
You know, New York detective. He wouldn't say that unless he believed it. Yeah.
Well, and then Robert Ressler, who was at FBI and has written numerous books, he is a staunch supporter of you.
He saw what I could do, and in fact, he's the one that invited me to Quantico. I was lecturing to a police academy or a group of 300-400 police at this college, and a parapsychologist had lecture first, and then it was me, and then I didn't know it was going to be the FBI profiler, Ressler. And in those days, I don't do this anymore, but I was stupid enough to hand out envelopes, and then I wouldn't know what they put in, but they were supposed to put their initial or some design. So when I picked it up, I would know who the person, or the person would know who they were. Mm-hmm. And I remember two of the cops switched things and tried to trick me.
Oh.
But they told Ressler at break time, and so he made them come on the stage and apologize to me and tell the truth to the audience.
Oh, that's great.
But I asked him long after that I had been going to Quantico for several times, what impressed you about my abilities? And he said, well, you were holding one of the envelopes, and you said, oh, this man has black hair. No, I see white hair. And I said more things about him, but the man stood up, and he had a hat on, and when he took it off, he had a big streak of white right down the middle of his head.
That's great. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a break and come back and talk about the skepticism in law enforcement with Noreen Renier. Welcome back to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries. Okay, let's talk about the skepticism within law enforcement.
Let's talk about the what?
The skepticism within law enforcement. I'm sure you run up against some pretty dicey situations.
In the beginning, more so, and every once in a while I'll get one. But I do things that they just know something's happening, and so I don't really get it too much. Or if it is there, of course they should be skeptical because there's so many frauds and charlatans that some of them are well-meaning and have a little bit of ability, and others are out-and-out frauds. So I do think that their skepticism is warranted.
Yes, absolutely. But how did they? Okay, over the time of years that you have done this, would you basically say it is because of your accuracy and your abilities to assist them? And when we talk about working on a case, you're not solving it. You're assisting, correct?
I'm another tool for the long arm of the law. It's just another tool that I never solve crimes. I just give them information, and they have to follow it up and do their work. But no, I'm just another tool for them to use.
Well, yeah, I would imagine that their egos and bringing someone in who is not a law enforcement officer is like, well, how in the world do you know anything?
Right, right. Well, the reputation is pretty good now, and they all pretty much check me out. Every once in a while, I get a skeptical one, but by the time I'm finished with the session, they're not skeptical anymore.
No, they're not, are they?
No.
Well, let's look at some of these great cases of yours. You worked on the Lacey Peterson case. You worked on the Zodiac Killer case. What one would you like to share with our listeners today?
I think the Zodiac Killer one.
Okay.
Because I really hadn't planned on working with it. I was up in New York to be on a Joan Rivers show, and they waited till the show was over, and they took us out of the Park Plaza and put us in some dumpy hotel across from a police station. And I noticed them both glancing up in one area of a sprinkler system. And when they left, I wrote to my girlfriend that was with me, we're bugged. And she freaked out, so she went to Macy's to go shopping.
Where did
they
put
didn't
the
hear
bug?
anything in the room, of course, so they had to come and knock and make sure I was still there. And we had to wait till late at night because they wanted everyone out of the place so no one would know that they had worked with me. Mm-hmm. And they interrogated me. Oh God, it was hours. It was just hours. And then the next I'll tell you later what I said, but the next morning, they gave us a police escort out of town. But what was so funny, the only person I spoke to that I was working with them was Gaberth, and he leaked it out to the press.
No.
Yes, and when I got home, it was Good Morning America, Larry King, and I had promised him I wouldn't talk about it. So I had to say no to everybody.
So you had given them information on the Zodiac Killer.
I remember that everyone thought it was a black man, but when I tuned into the case, they gave me original handwriting of one of the designs. They let me actually touch stuff. Mm-hmm. I saw that he was more Hispanic, and I forgot the name now. Oh, gosh, amazing how quickly you forget things. But I gave them a nickname, and explained where I saw him living, which in New York it was hard because the trains are there, and I don't think I was really as good as I normally am because being in the police station, and they did give me wine though. Remember that?
Yes, they gave you a bottle of wine, I think.
Yeah, they did supply me with wine, but I think that's about it. I forget exactly everything I said, but when they, of course, when they did arrest him, he was Hispanic, and his name was what I had said, and he had the sister, and he lived where I had said he did. So, it was pretty accurate, but it wasn't enough for them to catch him.
Well, I think any assistance to, especially for cold cases, I mean, my God, what do these law enforcement officers have to lose by, utilizing somebody who has a disability?
Exactly.
And if they could find a way to put us on their payroll, I'd be really happy about that. How about you?
Or we could train theirs. We could train, and we don't need 100 cops doing this. We just need one or two that develop, and they're out there. They are, and one day this will happen. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it will happen.
Well, I'm going to try with your assistance to make sure that does happen. Because
I love that.
Because I think that your book is really quite good, especially the way that you have developed, as I said, the dimensions of the clock, being able to see certain things, and training these cops to ask pertinent questions.
Yes, the questions are so important. I remember after the Reagan incident, and he was, the attempted assassination, the Secret Service came down on me. They checked me out, did all the stuff, and interviewed me once, and then came to my house and interviewed me again. And what they said, and this is very important, we're talking about questions, they said, do you see any danger in the future for the president? So I tune in, My keywords are danger, president, future.
Got it.
And all of a sudden, I'm flying. I'm up in the air, and I look down, and I see a parade. And I can't recognize the uniforms. I know they're foreign uniforms. And all of a sudden, I hear all this gunshot going on, and I told them the time. And, of course, they must have scurried all over the place.
Oh, I've got goosebumps, Noreen. Go on.
Yeah, I'm getting them, too. But the 3 months or whatever time period I saw, President Sadat was killed.
Wow.
With the parade of, to me, they were foreign uniforms.
Yeah, you could tell they were foreign uniforms. Did you get the colors? Could you see the colors?
No, if he had said, the information came in, if he had said, zoom down, I want you to describe the uniform.
Right.
I could have.
This is very interesting because I trained a little bit as a remote viewer, and when you have a monitor in the remote viewing program,
yes.
And
I don't have one half the times, and I
need
yell at
monitor.
my cop.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, to be able to have somebody, and the other thing about you is you go to the location. You're there. Your consciousness is there, and like in remote viewing, I think the scariest thing about that program was if you don't have a great monitor to help you, you can be stuck in the emotions of the victim at the scene.
Yes. And see, in the beginning, I didn't, so I had to learn things, and then the police, I give them all these things, how to question me. I doubt if they read it, but I think they get so stunned at what's going on and how quickly this information comes out. It's not their fault. It's the first time they're using me.
Right, yeah. I had a cop once just start laughing, and his face got red, and I said, what's going on? He says, I can't believe you know what's in that envelope. I can't get over it. And I said, well, look, we can't work here if you can't get over it.
I love it.
But it
okay.
Is
yeah, I like that. Yes. We can't be in too much awe. We have to.
I could sit here and talk to you for hours about this.
Too.
But we're going to take another break, and we're going to come back and speak about some other things that you're doing.
Okay.
Welcome back to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries, and I have with us today Noreen Renier, who is a real-life psychic investigator. Well, Noreen, now that you see what's going on in the world with our government, et cetera, has the FBI come to you about more, how should I say? Okay, good.
No, they're a little afraid of me at this time because of if anything, leaked. But what they don't realize, I work on hundreds, it's up to 600 now. I work on hundreds of cases that they ask me not to talk, and I don't talk.
Of course you don't.
All they would have to say, don't talk. And I know what that means. But no, they haven't. And the skeptics are really bad out there, the, quote, professional ones. They try to debunk everybody. They call my cops if they can find them, harass them, tell them that was ridiculous. Psychic can't, such thing as psychic. Yeah. So it scares them a little bit. It does.
Well, when you say, that you are told not to talk, how do you personally handle all this information? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh, well, what is so wonderful, because I am a trance medium, the next day I'll forget. I have no recall of what I said.
Perfect.
Everything is tape recorded and transcribed, because I can't even stand to listen to myself. If I'm being killed, it's just too upsetting. But the written word doesn't seem to bother me as much. So we have everything transcribed for the police. We send them all of that. And of course, they're tape recording it too. But I get exhausted, and I can't do it every day. And I noticed as I get older, I can't do it as long. Before, I could do it a couple hours at a time. Now 45 minutes comes, and I can just feel myself being exhausted. So I give them 2 sessions. Like, first one, follow up everything for the same price, and then the second one, they should have more information or better questions, and we can do it again. And this Texas case that the triple homicide, I think I've given her 4 sessions.
Right, and they'll just keep coming back and asking for more, of course.
Right. Well, I try to limit it to 2, but every once in a while you feel sorry for them. They don't have a big budget, and they really need more help. Or we know who the killer is, now we've got to find the darn shotgun.
Well,
things like that.
If in fact you are working as a trans medium, then it's really difficult for you to separate yourself from this information. So my question to you is, how hard, well, I can't do it. I can't involve myself in tracking a serial killer. If you are tracking a serial killer, don't you become that serial killer?
Right.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. Everyone's talents are not all for the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with my memory loss and just not, I think my ego, which I have a big one when I'm Noreen,
mm-hmm.
but when I'm psychic, it's gone. You know, it's just there to get information for them, that's all.
Well, I think that that's really, really healthy. And you mentioned at the end of this book, and I read every single page, my dear, you mentioned wanting to teach. And I noticed on your website there were some events that were coming up. How was the one in, what was it, July 12th that you did?
Yes, in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. How'd it go?
It was, I don't like a big group, and we had, I'd say 23, 25 men and women, which I was surprised how many men were in the class. They did exceptionally well. At the end, we collected driver's license, put them in envelopes, and they had to put a design or something on it. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I showed off and did 3 of them. And so to give them an idea, and as I did it, I would say, now, look, I'm questioning my mind. I'm asking to see any, and I would do it. And then they all had an envelope with a driver's license that they didn't know who it belonged to. Mm-hmm. They did so well. I was impressed. One of them, I remember distinctly, she said, whoever owns this, he or she, I think she had already described it as a he, has a city light on his property. You know, a light mm-hmm. that lights up, I guess. Mm-hmm. I would have never thought of that. I mean, it's not random. It's not something common. And he said, yes, there's a city light on my, I don't know if it was called a city light, how she said it, mm-hmm. but I thought, wow. Some of them got the age of the person. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was amazing. And they didn't just get one thing. They all got several things. So
if you take a group of people and you put them in a room and you tell them that this is what we're going to do, and you have, of course you're going to have some healthy skepticism. It's staggering how many people get the information from holding an object.
And they're amazed at themselves. They didn't think they could do it.
Right.
But now that was at the end of our little, workshop, one-day workshop. And in between, I had been doing the auras and the telepathy and this, everything just to get them warmed up and believing that they could do this. Mm-hmm. So it was exciting. The energy was just amazing, and they were so good.
Well, I'm hoping that this gives you more of an opportunity to share your talents and your expertise and train law enforcement.
I want to desperately. I'm getting too old. I mean, I've got to stay around long enough so I can accomplish my goals, and then I can go.
Well, I think actually that this book is a huge accomplishment, and it's very entertaining. It's quite the page-turner, but it is instructional as well for not only people that have these abilities, but the law enforcement agencies. If they get sections of this book, I am sure that it will be very, very helpful to them.
I agree. But I'm even writing a real how-to book from the very beginning. So
well,
I'm working on that.
Yeah. What's coming up for you?
Well, I've got to try to hurry up and finish my book because I want to give more seminars and lectures, and I want that book there to be the guide for them. Mm-hmm. Trying to see what else is happening right now.
Are you teaching small groups where you are?
No, not really, because I didn't like to teach for a long, long time because I was teaching at all these different places, an uncredited course. It was 6 weeks long, and I am terribly unorganized and would never write anything down, so it would all be in my head. So it was always a lot of work to be teaching because I'm so disorganized in real life.
I understand that. Yeah, I completely get that. I can find what I want on a very messy desk, but nobody else could.
Yes. And once I clean up my messy desk, I can't find anything.
Well, I am just thrilled to be able to have this time with you.
Wonderful.
Well, we're just going to have to do something. We're going to have to plan something and get a group together.
And it could be a prototype thing. I want to do it. I do. And I believe you that something's going to happen from your end, yes.
Well, it's very exciting for me to do this work. I love it. I think that cops and any law enforcement agency, of course there's problems within all of them, but, they're the ones that are there to protect and serve. And if there's anything that those of us that have an ability can do to assist these guys, I can't see anything more rewarding. I didn't get to talk to you about this earlier, but I wanted to mention that you prefer to work with detectives. I mean, families
absolutely.
will call you, correct?
Yes, I don't work with the family, even though they might hire me at times. I still work with the police. Because the family might have conceived ideas, they're too open. With the cops, I do like their closedness that I like my place.
So when a family contacts you about something, do you basically say, have the homicide or have the detective?
Right, you can
me?
pay my fee, but I have to work with detective on the case, yep.
Well, that keeps it very clear because their emotions are so devastating.
And it would affect me too much. I'm too sensitive. And then I would feel sorry or maybe try to edit if I saw the guy doing something bad, maybe not want to tell the family. With the police, it wouldn't matter.
Right. So what's your website, Noreen?
It's just NoreenRenier.com.
And this book, A Mind for Murder, The Real-Life Files of a Psychic Investigator, everybody should pick this book up who has any interest in law enforcement, solving crimes, and it's very popular, this whole topic, based on what we're seeing on television. CSI
Absolutely.
has blown up. Medium, of course, has become very successful. This is the real deal. Noreen Renier is the one who's lived it. And I want to thank you so much for, basically opening the door for those of us who can assist law enforcement, sharing your amazing stories, your talents, and I'm just so thrilled. I'm a big fan. Thank you so much, Noreen Renier.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. It was a pleasure.
Marla Fries for Dreamland.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
What happened in Stephenville, Texas in early 2008 shocked and amazed the world. Now, exclusively, Linda Moulton Howe has an interview with someone who used the Freedom of Information Act to gain FAA records about just what was seen and reported over Stevensville and elsewhere in Central Texas on those stunning nights. Here she is from Albuquerque, New Mexico, EarthFiles.com's Emmy Award-winning reporter, Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, thanks, Whitley. It was back in early January to mid-February 2008 that a series of unidentified aerial lights and strange craft were reported by dozens of eyewitnesses in the Stephenville, Dublin, Selden, and Glen Rose region, southwest of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. One especially active date was January 8th, beginning around 6:15 p.m., with 3 eyewitnesses sitting on a hill in Selden, east of Stephenville. One of those eyewitnesses was Steve Allen, who is a pilot and businessman and longtime resident of nearby Glen Rose. He is used to watching civilian and military air traffic and says that night he and his 2 colleagues saw 4 bright lights in a rectangle pattern, either flying in formation or might have been one huge craft that Steve estimated to be a half-mile long. The lights came in rapidly, seemed to hover, changed patterns, and even morphed into what looked like two vertical windows filled with white fire. After creating a scene that Steve Allen said looked like something out of the Bible, the fiery windows returned to a pattern of bright lights that took off rapidly toward Stephenville to the west. Within 10 minutes, the lights returned, changed yet again. This time, there were vivid red glowing half-spheres, and Steve said two F-16 jets came roaring toward the lights with afterburners glowing, and they seemed to chase after the lights, and the lights moved so rapidly back in the eastern direction from which they had originally come that Steve said the lights looked like they were first right in front of him, and then the next second the lights were near the horizon with the two jets trying to catch up. There were many other UFO reports to law enforcement that night until at least 8 p.m. And one man in Littleton, Colorado, who was following news events about the Stephenville, Texas phenomena was Glenn Schultz, a radar specialist since he was a U.S. Army draftee in September 1952 and was assigned to record missile launch telemetry data at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Later, he monitored Skylab sensor data from Cape Canaveral. Glenn Schultz knew that the Federal Aviation Administration's radar beacons, designed to help air traffic controllers reduce air congestion around airports, would have received whatever beeps from transponder beacons were sent from civilian and military aircraft in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth and Stephenville region. Glenn also knew that FAA radar tapes can be reused within 14 days. That means erased and covered up with other data. And that if he was to get any usable information, he had to file a Freedom of Information Act request immediately. He did, and he ended up with raw radar data from 5 FAA radar beacons covering the Stephenville region. To help analyze the phenomena, MUFON Research Director Robert Powell joined in the effort to see if he and Glenn Schultz could find any hard radar data of unknown objects that might match the timeline of eyewitness accounts. And by definition, an unknown object would be one that painted a track on the FAA radar but did not give off any transponder beeps, as all other normal civilian air traffic and most military traffic would. After hundreds of hours, by July 2008, Glenn Schultz and Robert Powell released their formal report through MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, that includes graphics and can be seen in its entirety at the MUFON website, www.mufon.com. Glenn Schultz and Robert Powell did find FAA radar unknowns that don't match up to any known civilian and military aircraft, and one unknown that travels for nearly an hour on a straight track very slowly to the President George Bush Ranch compound in Crawford, Texas, east of Stephenville. Since Robert Powell did most of the match-up work between timelines of the radar data and eyewitness testimonies, I talked with him about the highlights of their discoveries.
So the first radar unknown was at 6:15 p.m., and that radar unknown was two data points that showed up on radar 20 seconds apart. And one of the data points shows up just north of Selden by about 3 miles, and the second radar point shows up north of Stephenville by about 7 to 8 miles.
So that might relate to Steve Allen saying that the first thing that they saw was that rectangular configuration of the lights coming in front of him and his two colleagues sitting on the hill, and then that it took off, as I understand it, quite rapidly, going to their left. That might be the moment where the radar picks them up in Stephenville.
Right, that's correct.
Is there anything about the radar data itself that gives you size and speed?
The FAA radar data will not give you size. speed I can calculate because it gives me a latitude, longitude coordinate for each of those 2 points, and it gives me time. So I can calculate the distance between the 2 points, the time it took to get there, and then I can calculate a minimum speed.
And what speed did you calculate between the Selden radar object and the Stephenville radar object at 6:15 p.m.?
Approximately 2,100 miles per hour. I would not be surprised that some of our military jets might be able to travel at 2,100 miles per hour if they were at high altitude.
Where there was less atmospheric friction.
Right.
But at 2,100 miles an hour, at the level of being very near where Steve Allen and the others were in Selden, it was low, traveling very fast. Wouldn't they have heard the sound barrier being broken?
They should have, as long as it broke that sound barrier someplace in their vicinity.
What convinces you that the radar that you have from the FAA and the FOIA request and Steve Allen and his colleagues' description match?
Steve saw this sometime between 5:45 and 6:15. There's another witness who was driving west near Chalk Mountain and saw 2 very bright objects directly west towards Stephenville, and that was at 6:10 p.m. At 6:20 p.m., there was also a witness near Gorman, Texas, 20 or 30 miles to the west of Stephenville, who sees an object that he believes is just north of Stephenville and describes it as a series of lights that turn on and turn off. And there's also a witness near Lake Proctor at 6:20 to 6:25 p.m. who sees an object in the Dublin-Stephenville area that's a group of lights moving at a rapid speed. So what I did is said, okay, I've got a radar fix on an object at 6:15. I've got 3 witnesses whose time frame is very close to 6:15, and then I have a grouping of 4 witnesses near Selden who have given different times and could be anywhere from 5:45 to 6:15. Therefore, I believe it's likely it was probably closer to 6:15 than 6:45, and then all 4 reports were basically looking at the same object that was on radar.
Mm-hmm. What unfolds in terms of your radar data of unknowns and other eyewitness reports up to 8 o'clock on January 8, 2008?
Okay, there was another event where a lady was driving her car near the city of Alexander, and she was about to crest a hill when suddenly she saw 2 very bright red globes that were very close to her, and her very first thought was that these were 2 planes that were about to crash because of the color of the light and the size. But that was only for a second that she thought that. But then as soon as she continued looking, she realized those 2 lights were stationary. They were not moving. And she pulled a little bit over to the right of the road, and then within a few seconds, the lights just disappeared. She described them as if you had pulled up behind a school bus at night, and that the lights were similar to the reddish-orange globe lights on the back of the school bus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I looked for any objects on radar near her position. I did find an object on radar about 6 or 8 miles southwest of her location, which is the direction she said she saw this object. In that southwesterly direction is an object which we pick up on radar, and this object we actually track on radar for over an hour. And this is the one that, if you continue tracking it, by 8 o'clock, it is within 10 miles of the Crawford Ranch.
So that's only 25 minutes after the Steve Allen and his colleagues' sighting in Selden.
Yes, that's approximately 25 minutes after his sighting.
You have identified as an unknown that was not identified by military or civilian as being any known craft?
I can't say whether the military identified it or not because I don't know what they did. The FAA, my understanding is they concentrate primarily on targets with beacons on them because that's what they're trying to do, is control civilian aircraft, military aircraft near airports. So I don't know that this object in real time would have come to their attention or not. I just don't know.
But that what you FOIA'd were FAA radar tower beacons that can pick up signals being sent from planes, and they keep a record of that.
That is correct.
It's not from airports, it's from the FAA radar towers that are recording the beeps from aircraft.
That's correct.
And do they record the beeps from both military and civilian aircraft?
Yes, they record two types of events. Most aircraft have beacons on them, all your civilian and most of your military. And those beacons are basically a beacon that sends a signal from the aircraft to the FAA tower, and it has information in it, such as I'm playing such and such, I'm at this altitude, etc. Now, the other information they get is what most people think of as radar information, similar to how we track things in World War II and military tracks today, where the radar system in Fort Worth, for example, sends a radar beam, and then anything it hits bounces back, and they pick up that signal. And that's called a primary radar signal. So this object that we track, it has no beacon, so it's not an object that has received approval from the FAA to be flying in the area. That's why it has no beacon.
And it shows up on the FAA radar. Why, if there is no beeping?
It shows up on FAA radar because this is the type of object that is captured because the FAA radar has sent out a signal, and it bounces off this object and comes back to the FAA radar. So what they're seeing is the reflection of the signal off this object.
Which is not putting out the standard civilian or military beeping signal.
Correct.
And this is the object that ends up at 8 p.m. in your last radar track of the unknown within approximately 10 miles of the Crawford Bush Ranch?
That's correct.
Did it circle over Stephenville, Dublin, and then end up at the Crawford Ranch?
The only thing I can say is that the object I tracked for an hour is on a straight line course. Now, it disappears off radar occasionally during that 1 hour period, but its course is always constant. I can't say that it is or is not related to the first radar sighting we received when Steve Allen saw something.
Mm-hmm. Do you have speeds over that hour of this object?
Yes. The average speed is around 44 to 49 miles per hour. That's very slow. Now, there is one time on radar where the object clocking it between every 10-second radar sweep. So you lose some accuracy when you do that. But at the same time, if an object is making any sudden movements, that's the only way you can catch it. But at any rate, at one point in time, it's at 532 miles an hour, and 10 seconds later, it's at 49 miles an hour.
Do we have any military or civilian plane that you're aware of that can go from 500 miles an hour down to in the 40 miles an hour in just a few seconds?
The only one that might be able to do that in a 10-second time frame would be either a Harrier-type jet, or I believe the new F-35s have Harrier-type jet capabilities. So it's possible they might be able to. The problem would be to maintain a slow speed for over an hour. I would think they would run out of fuel, but I'm not an expert on those type of aircraft.
But even more than that, any aircraft that is low and traveling at 49 miles an hour, you would assume would make quite a bit of noise that would have been heard by everyone, and yet everyone's report is that everything they saw was completely silent.
Right. We only have one witness tied to this object, and that was the lady who was near Alexander. When she saw it, she heard nothing.
When you and Glenn realized that the data took one object that was in the air for an hour to the Crawford Bush Ranch, what was your discussion with each other about the implications that these unknowns seemed to be focused on tracks going to the Crawford Ranch?
Our main thought was, there's an object moving in that direction, what would be the reaction of the military aircraft? And, of course, we looked at that, and we didn't see any reaction from them. So that was probably the most surprising part to us. Whether this object is a military aircraft, civilian aircraft, or whatever it is, it just seems strange that they would not react. So that either indicates they already know what it is, they're not concerned, or they have not seen it, one of the two.
On any radar?
On the F-16's radar.
Mm-hmm. In a time of war in which national security from any kind of terrorist attacks is this administration's stated highest priority, how could there be these unknowns flying around in the air from 6:15 p.m. to 8 p.m. when your data ends without military response, especially at the Crawford Bush compound?
That's a very good question, and one which I don't have the answer to. We were able to obtain that radar signature from a radar antenna that was farther away than the F-16s were. In our report, we believe there's probably an AWAC aircraft in the area during this entire time frame. We found an object that maintained an altitude of about 41,000 feet, which is higher than most of your civilian aircraft fly. It was there for the entire time we have our radar data, and it's flying figure eight over the area, going as far north as North Texas, as far south as north of the Austin area. And those aircraft have the capability of seeing downwards with radar for 250 miles. Those type of aircraft are used whenever they're trying to control. I mean, they're like a flying headquarters, basically.
Your implication is, if the flying headquarters, that somebody might have had knowledge of something in that Stephenville-Crawford area that needed to be observed during that period of 4 to 8 p.m. on January 8th, 2008?
What I can say is I would think that if that was an AWAC, I would think that they would have seen all objects in that area.
Well, let's go back then to Steve Allen and his two friends sitting on that hill in Selden. What do you have in the radar that corresponds with the appearance of these two jets there at the time that Steve Allen and his friends were watching?
I cannot find any radar data that confirms the jet that Steve indicated he saw after the second sighting, and they indicated there were two jets following the object. He also indicated to me that the jets were at very low altitude, and that would be based on how large they looked as well as the noise that they could hear. So if the jets were below 2,500 feet, they would not show up on radar. However, we cannot find any jets with the radar data we have that at some point in time come back up to a higher altitude.
And why would the jets stay at a low altitude out of the radar?
That I don't know.
How do you explain Major Carl Lewis's revision 2 weeks after this event and saying that, oh, I'm sorry, when we said in January 8th that we didn't have any jets in the air, we now discovered that we had 10. Did you ever find radar tracks from 10 jets between 4 and 8 p.m. on January 8th, 2008?
Yes, we tracked every jet so that we knew where every jet was at every point in time. So we tracked a total of 10 jets. We received the logbook from, it used to be Carswell Air Force Base. Now it's a joint base between the Navy and the Air Force. We received their logbook. Almost everything is redacted out.
You mean blacked out?
Yes. What is left is the 8 jets that were referred to, and all that is there is the time the jets took off and the time the jets returned. Everything else you can't see, such as pilot comment or what beacon code the jets flew on or anything like that. Immediately after those 8 jets, there are 2 lines that are completely blacked out, and those we're pretty confident are the 9th and 10th jet. We don't know why they blacked those 2 out. The logbook also shows earlier in the day a series of blacked out what looks like flights also, but there's no way to know. We found all 10 radar tracks.
Were any of those jets over Stephenville, Dublin, Selden, Glen Rose area?
Oh, during given periods of time, they flew over the Stephenville, Dublin area.
Can you now go to the other radar matchups to eyewitnesses that follow Steve Allen and the other woman?
Okay, the only other one where we matched up was when the Constable Leroy Gateland saw an object just south of his home. I guess my view, Linda, is that I think there's sufficient data here between the radar and the witness account to establish enough likelihood that we have unknown objects that the government should look at this and provide an answer to the public.
And another mystery, Whitley, is that when they followed where the radar material went on those 2 jets, in which the logbook had everything blacked out, they find that there were FAA radar tracks on two jets that went all the way up to Oklahoma and then circled back down to Stephenville, Dublin, and the Glen Rose area before returning to Carswell Air Force Base. But those two jets, in terms of the FAA radar log, were making this very odd loop out of Texas into Oklahoma and back around to Stephenville in the 7:30 to 8 time period, which is later than Steve Allen and his colleagues sitting on that hill in Selden at approximately 6:15 p.m., watching that amazing morphing drama in the sky in which they insist that two F-16s came low and loud with their back rear engines just blazing away, and those two jets, assuming the eyewitnesses are telling exactly what they saw in that 6:15 to 6:20 time period, or 6:30 time period, they can't find radar tracks for those jets. So the mysteries are just layered when it comes to the phenomena in Stephenville.
Well, Linda, maybe the two witnesses made a mistake about the jets, and this is another possibility, maybe the sound and the appearance of the jets was something else.
Mimicking.
Yeah.
Something unknown, mimicking jets.
You know, Linda, the larger question here is one of whether or not this object or these objects had anything to do with us, if they were something of ours, because it's very suggestive that there was no reaction when they drew near the presidential compound. Of course, he wasn't there at the time, so that might have had something to do with it. But in general, there seems to be a lot of jet activity that's more observational than anything.
And the fact that there was an AWAC up 41,000 feet over the entire period, and as he said, they're used like an office monitoring what's going down at lower altitude.
Yeah, and there's no, AWACS, there aren't that many AWACS stationed in the United States, so one thing is certain, the AWACS was there before the object arrived, not vice versa.
Yes.
You know what would be interesting to do, if it only were possible, to monitor that population in that area of Texas and find out if there are any odd abduction experiences or anything like that going on or were going on in February, March. If there was any animal mutilations or unusual events like that. I have received nothing on my website from people in that area who would suggest that. But folks, if you do live in that area and you do have such a thing to report, do report it to us. The appearance of anything unusual in your life that might suggest the kinds of close encounter phenomenon that we discuss on this program.
And whatever was happening, the very fact that the government has remained completely silent, there has not been one official comment outside of Major Lewis's admitting that they had 10 jets, which don't explain at all the unknown objects that are now verified with all of this research by Glenn Schultz and Robert Powell from radar data.
Now, what does MUFON say about this, Linda?
I don't know if they have made any sort of speculation.
I mean, about the earlier, I think they said something earlier about the Stephenville case, just in general.
Well, I don't know because I have concentrated on my own interviews with people.
Yes.
And
I don't follow MUFON very carefully either. I thought you might know.
No, but I do think that Robert Powell and Glenn Schultz, a MUFON director of research, that's Robert Powell working with Glenn Schultz, who has a very large background in engineering and radar research, that the combination of those two, and Robert doing all of the matching up of the timelines with eyewitness data that MUFON had collected, that this is one of those valuable pieces of evidence that I wish that we were able to do on so many other cases in which we might be able to get radar data and match up the unknowns. But Glenn and Robert are the first to say. They can't prove what the source of the unknowns are.
No.
What we have is completely non-transponder beeping objects on AA radar in the timelines of Steve Allen, the woman on the hill, and with Constable Leroy Gayton in Dublin later.
Yes, indeed. And we don't, it does not fit the profile of secret aircraft at all. It fits the profile of something very different. Either this is some kind of object that is ours coming in from deep space, or it is something very, very different. But certainly it's highly unlikely that the explanation is that it's a secret aircraft of ours, because if it was a secret aircraft of ours, why in the world call such attention to it with all of these jets and an AWACS and everything else around there?
And I think that it is highly significant, the police reports, in addition to Constable Leroy Gayton. The policemen on or about January 8th saw this enormous, what they said could be a half-mile long object in the sky that was long and went from a horizontal position to a vertical position. What aircraft on this planet in any territorial nation has anything that is a half-mile long, can be moving silently horizontal, and then suddenly be vertical?
Well, that's a good question, Linda. I don't have one. I don't think the Brazilians have one. And the other question, though, is since it had no obvious airfoil-like capabilities, and yet you have demonstrated on those FAA tapes quite an incredible ability in terms of flight characteristics to move slowly as well as very fast, and to maintain the slow speed for quite a long time. Those are unusual flight characteristics.
Yes, they are. And then when you combine them with the drawings and go to the earlier in January eyewitness sighting by Ricky Sorrells in Dublin, and that is that drawing that was done on a computer that shows this enormous silver gray, barn gray object that he said had these cone-shaped holes very methodically lined up, and that he could not see the sky from where he was because this huge object with these strange holes was blocking his entire overhead vision.
Well, it's hard for me to believe that if this is something from somewhere else, or a parallel universe, or even a time machine perhaps from the future, that it didn't come here for some reason. In other words, they didn't come and look around and then go away again. Something else took place. I don't know what it was, but my guess is it ain't over yet in that part of the country, and that we have yet to hear the whole story.
And I don't think it's over in this country or the rest of the world. There is something about 2008 going forward that everyone has the sense that more and more strange aerial objects are showing up everywhere and are being described. And hopefully between Earth Files and Dreamland and other programs that are trying to deal with real eyewitnesses, that we can encourage people to have the courage to come forward and report exactly what they see and what has happened to them, because if we don't know what is happening to people on the ground, we will never understand why this phenomena keeps repeatedly showing up.
And unfortunately, the secrecy that the phenomena prefers, or seems to prefer at least at times, is the one part of this that the government supports wholeheartedly. And that's unfortunate. One wonders if they're simply being very, very poor citizens and very disloyal to their people, or they are under duress. If they're not under duress or don't have some compelling overriding reason for maintaining the kind of secrecy they do, it's a real crying shame.
It is, and eventually I think that historians, assuming that the Earth survives with humanity, that at another 22nd, 23rd century, to look back at this bizarre silence and upside-down reality that was perpetrated by leaders in all nations of the planet to keep the citizenry away from the fact that we're not alone in the universe and that other intelligences come here and do things. That is as strange as anything that Orwell ever wrote in 1984.
It certainly is. And, Linda, it is, we have a little extra time today. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're working on now? Everyone always loves this when you talk about some of the things that are floating, flying, or levitating past your desk.
Well, I'll tell you one that is very much related to this report today. I got a contact from a man who has a very strong scientific technology background. He has done subcontract work for the government. He has done independent contract. You would say that his field of expertise is in what is known as spectroscopy, having to do with sources of light. It can be sources of light that are terrestrial. It can be sources of light that are astronomical. And he contacted me by sending me an image that looked very much like the strange multicolored symbol taken by the man in Stephenville, Texas on January 26th that has been so controversial because somebody tried to push the notion that those pulsing, three-dimensional, elaborate, complex colored symbols were simply his JVC, the eyewitness is David Carone, was simply his JVC video camera going haywire. I never bought that for a moment. And now I have more than one image taken by somebody who is very skilled with working with high-end telescopes, cameras, and spectroscopy. And he has taken a series in New Mexico of the same multicolored, beaded, three-dimensional symbols. He is as baffled as anybody else. He has never seen anything like it until the year of 2008. And Whitley, if there is anybody else listening who has seen a light that starts out like a sphere or a disc, and then it begins to pulse, multicolored lights is what it looks like to the eye, and then when a telescope or a camera with a long telephoto lens is pointed, it is very clear that there are projections that are being projected away from whatever this sphere or disc is.
Yes.
And that is what David Carone videotaped near the Stephenville airport on January 26, 2008, and that is what this scientist and technical engineer in New Mexico has captured through a telescope with a camera. I'm going to be sharing this story in the next couple of weeks, and we're trying to work out whether or not I can use his name or background or not. To me, the images are significant enough that I will share them either as an anonymous source or he will put his name on the record.
Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much.
My mind than what I was reading. So I discarded it and forgot all about it until a few weeks later, one of her friends asked me to meditate. Now, long ago, 30-some years ago, meditation wasn't very popular. Mm-hmm. People thought it was an occult, that it was going to damage your brain or some sort. But she said it relaxed you, and I liked that word. So I thought, well, what the heck? Let me give it a try. So I grabbed my best girlfriend, who was an ex-nun, and she believed in nothing at that time, and we both started meditating. And I think the first meditation was uneventful, but I think it was the second or third meditation that we did. It was at my house, and it was a round table, and the sun was coming in, and it was in the morning, and we started the breathing. It wasn't, I don't remember exactly, but I know we were doing a lot of deep breathing and things like that, and all of a sudden, it felt like somebody had plugged me into a socket.
Wow.
I didn't know it was energy at that time until it started hurting me, and I cried out. And as I cried out, it was like a voice spoke out of my mouth, but I could hear it. Now, and my mind was going, what the hell is going on? Is there insanity in my face? And I kept thinking, and this voice is talking and talking. But that when I opened my eyes, Joanne was crying. She was a Winnebago Indian, and I had just given her a message from her deceased grandmother that had died.
Right then and there.
Right. So that was the beginning. And then it really was, does it really work? Does it really work? So I think the one thing anyone that wants to develop it is to practice.
Well, I think that this is really interesting because you did not mention in the book growing up and having these abilities. This happened, when you were in your 20s?
I think closer to my 30s.
And
yeah,
so
I think I was in my 30s.
Yes, you had this amazing awakening through a meditation.
It just blew me away. It was like it landed me on the moon, and it was all so new. But I still had that basic instinct to be skeptical. And so that's why I always wanted to test myself, prove that this was real. And that's why I did a lot of research outside of Duke. It was with the Psychical Research Foundation.
Right, at Duke University. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot because I thought they would have a book that would say, Chapter 2, page 4, this is how you can hold a ring or watch and get information. But, of course, they didn't.
Welcome to Dreamland. This is Marla Fries, and I am very excited about my guest today. She is the grande dame of psychic detective work. Her book, A Mind for Murder, in my opinion, is more compelling than the TV shows Medium, Ghost Whisperer, CSI, Cold Case, and Homicide all put together. With more than 400 criminal cases under her belt, she is the only psychic to lecture at the FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. She's quite a character and has lots to share with us today. Welcome, Noreen Renier.
Well, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, tell our listeners how you went from being Director of Advertising and Public Relations for a hotel chain to the most well-known psychic detective in the country.
Well, I can tell you did read the book, and I appreciate that. I do. I used to be a skeptic, and I think there's a difference between being skeptical and being closed-minded. And I did have an open mind, but I didn't really believe in psychic phenomena. And I was working as PR and advertising director for the Hyatt Hotel in Orlando, Florida. And someone asked me to rent one of our lecture rooms to a psychic. And I knew what they looked like. They all had long chins, big noses, and either a wart or obvious pimple on their face. And they dressed funny. So I didn't really want them at the hotel, so I kept avoiding them, and then finally I couldn't do it anymore, and I met her, the psychic, and I couldn't find one pimple or wart on her. She was a little petite thing in a suit.
In a suit.
And I remember it was, I think, a light blue, powder blue suit. And she knew I was skeptical, so she did something on me, which I didn't believe at that time, but she told me about some scars on my body, which no one really knew, but I still wasn't convinced. And then she told me about a new chair I had just gotten in my office, and no one knew about that. So I left, she told me more, but I left confused. How could someone do those things?
Right.
So I did rent her the hall, and then she gave me a book to read. It was talking about psychics working with the police, psychics traveling with their mind into the past or into the future, and I think a good science book at that time would have been more credible to my...
That some of us who do this work with investigators apply these talents to a very unique capability called psychometry. And let me ask you, do you work with crime scene photos?
No. I don't want to see the photograph. I want to see it in my head.
Got it.
So I get nothing from them. I don't even get a full name. All I want when they book the reading is to know if it's a missing person or a homicide, because each one is so different. With the missing person, everything is gone with them. And the first time I did this, I didn't think it would work. I just didn't think it would work. So I must have some other part of my mind that I'm using. And after the first 2 or 3 bodies that they found, I got more and more confident, and I started had miles a few times or feet a few times. Again, trying to figure out where they started from and lead the police where the body is now. Sometimes I fly above the body and try to give them landmarks so they know which section I'm talking about.
Oh, good. Well, listen, let's take a short break, Noreen,
okay,
and we're going to talk more about you hovering above that body and seeing where it is. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Marla Fries with Noreen Renier, and she is just describing about how she works when in an investigation, and you just mentioned hovering above a body. Now, holding the object and being transported, is that right?
Right. I think I call it, I'm traveling at a distance, a remote distance and seeing, but I can go 100 feet, 20 feet, whatever they want. But again, I'm at this time more in a semi-trance, so they have to ask me the questions.
Well, this is what I loved about your book, and I think that sections of your book should be distributed to every law enforcement agency across the country.
God, I love you. I didn't know I would love a woman. I do.
Well, maybe we can talk about this later. I think that the way that you have developed some of your techniques are crucial. You even brought in a hypnotist to work with.
In the beginning, I would try anything that would help me to be better at what I didn't. They just validated that I could do these things.
Well, I think it's important to let our listeners know that you use psychometry, which I've talked about on a number of different programs before, which is holding objects and gaining information. Before we talk about some of your famous cases, could you please give us a little example of how you do work? Can you tell us a little bit about the psychometry?
Okay. On police cases, the police say homicide. They have a body, so they usually send me. I do 99% of my work over the phone.
Oh, my, good.
It's easier going to the scene of the crime, but I can't travel all that. It just would be too expensive for everybody. So let's say they send me a belt. And maybe a shoe. It won't mess up their investigation, but it was on the person at the time he was killed. Then the next thing I do is describe by touching the belt. I want to make sure I'm connected. Again, here comes the skeptic in me. So I usually describe what the victim looked like when he was alive, and then they go, yes. Very seldom I get no's, but they go, yes. And then I become killed. Because at this point, I not only want to prove to myself that I'm tuned into this case, I want the detectives to know I'm real.
So you are actually, with your connection to the energy in the belt, you are becoming the person who is being killed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it used to be, in the beginning, I overdid it, and the pain was just excruciating at times, depending on how I was killed. But now I can just do a little bit and try to get out of it and go into a different place. But I do basically the same thing, and then they want to know what he looks like. So as the years progressed, I found I could work with an artist, and if they draw just what I see, it usually looks like the person that is the killer. So we have a picture of the killer, and it's not going to be an exact likeness, but at least they can eliminate the tall blondes or the fat redheads. It'll give them a ammo to go on. And then I just sit there and listen to what they want me to see and respond to whatever questions they have.
Well, this is, for our listeners, for anybody who's listening to this is Noreen is describing in perfection the way that she works and the way...
And really it was the police. I think we had started over the phone, and they had a detective that had been studying hypnotism and been working in it. So they asked if it would be all right to hypnotize me. And in those days, I didn't have a speakerphone. So I kept dropping the phone as I was going under a trance. But I gave them enough information that they were impressed, and they flew down. They were in New York. This was the Albany, New York case. And they flew down, and we did a session every day, and then they would go back and listen to it, and the next day we would do more. And it was, it works. The mind, it's amazing what the mind can do.
Well, you mentioned the remote viewing. Now, for our listeners, what Noreen is referring to is what I consider natural remote viewing, which is not the technical remote viewing that the military has been trained
That's right.
in.
They don't like you to use that term unless you're, but I go remotely, and I'm looking at a distance, so it's a different interpretation of it, but it's not the remote,
it's not
the militaries.
No, but it is natural.
It's
natural,
absolutely.
yes. And I think that to be able to allow the mind, which is so amazingly facile in so many ways, to be able to have the freedom to do this, I think that's what's so amazing about this work, Noreen. And the fact that you really, you and Dorothy, what was Dorothy's last name?
Allison.
Yes, Dorothy Allison, who passed away a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But, you guys are the ones that have gone out there and gone through the trenches and
open the doors for those
that... Yes, absolutely. I am so grateful for that. But, as we...
But I want to close those doors. What I want to do is train the police. Now, I'm not going to train them all, but if we had a small squad... Amber Alerts would be wonderful because I usually get the missing person cases. 2 years is new for me. It's usually 5, 10. I've done 40-year-old cases. In fact, I'm doing a 40-year-old case, a triple homicide now. Not this moment, but I'm doing one now. I think I have lectured to them, and I have given them a one-day workshop, and they're wonderful. They know a gun when they see a gun.
Of course, yes, and they're so intuitive themselves. They
are.
They're amazing.
I'm going to keep pounding on doors and screaming until they'll give me